1,000 Voices is an exotic heavy fusion rifle obtained from the final encounter in the Last Wish raid. The main perk Ahamkara's Eye reads, charging this weapon unleashes a giant continuous beam of death. The second perk Unforeseen Repercussions reads, this weapon's beam superheats its targets upon impact, causing delayed explosions. Before we get into how this weapon performs, let's talk about how the actual beam of death works, because there's a lot going on there. The weapon works exactly how you would expect a fusion rifle to perform. Charging it will allow you to shoot it. However, instead of an instant burst like a linear fusion rifle, or a short burst like a traditional fusion, you shoot out a substantially longer burst from the gun. It takes about 1 second to charge the shot, and then about 3/4 of a second to unleash the beam of death. While the beam is being fired, it damages whatever it hits for a total of 10 ticks of damage. Once the beam is stopped, whatever was hit by the initial beam's damage ticks will then explode. The explosions have a pretty generous blast radius as well and can indeed damage you if you are close enough. As far as range, the beam's effect is a little bit misleading when you're firing it. Despite it seeming to go wherever you point, it does have a definite end. This is about the maximum range that you can expect to use it. Any further and the beam will actually not reach the target. This is something that you definitely should keep aware of when picking your potential death beam targets. Let's quickly go over this weapon in PvP. As you would expect, it's an incredibly potent weapon against other players. Each tick of the beam will do 11 damage directly, but each explosion will deal about 100 damage if they're close to the explosion, and less depending on how far away they are. So depending on the spacing of the players and how creative you can get with your beam scribbling, you have the potential to get a few eliminations with each shot. Each ammo brick will give you 3 shots, so most of the time this means 3 kills. If you hit someone with the entire beam's duration, they will definitely die. So it's in your best interest to hit someone for 2 or 3 ticks of damage, and then try to go for another person with the same beam to increase your chances of landing multiple kills per shot. The only real drawbacks to using this as your heavy are the long charge time and potential to damage yourself off the explosions. If people are playing aggressive or the map has a lot of tight angles and corridors, then it's going to be difficult to be effective with your beam. However, if you're on a more open map and can get a good flank off, then you can really start having some fun. You don't have to be precise with this weapon. Painting the general area of a target will usually mean that you score a kill. Since the explosions have a pretty wide blast radius, you can even get some targets that are hiding behind cover. The overall power of this weapon definitely means that you should consider it for a PvP loadout if you're going to constantly try and go for heavy ammo. It has a greater potential than a typical grenade or rocket launcher, and also has one of the greater eases of uses of all heavy weapons. If you can get used to the slower charge time and be okay with occasionally blowing yourself up, then you should absolutely use this in PvP. It's one of the more fun weapons that you can use in your arsenal. Before we transition to talk about this gun in PvE, let's talk about it in a good in-between mode, Gambit. The absolute undeniable king of heavy weapons in Gambit right now is Sleeper Simulant. It's extremely potent for invading or taking care of an invader. It pumps out a ton of damage against the primeval or any other mob really. It also has enough ammo to do all of this without choosing one or the other. 1,000 Voices is a weapon that can easily compare to Sleeper for all of those things except ammo. Since it only holds 7 shots and picks up 2 off a brick or 3 off a raw brick, you have to choose where you use its damage wisely. Unless you get extremely lucky with ammo drops or just go all in on heavy ammo finder and fusion rifle reserves, then you will typically only be able to use this weapon as an invasion tool or mob damage. Whichever role you end up choosing, 1,000 Voices will excel at it. For invasions, it has an extremely high potential for getting multiple kills with a single shot. People usually group up in an area when clearing mobs, and this makes it easy to scribble some of the death beam in their general area. Even if they're behind cover, you can usually shoot around them to get those juicy moat denials. When it comes to primeval damage, it won't really hold up to Sleeper, or Shoddy, or Whisper, but it however will be really good at quickly destroying the envoys, which you should do before damaging the primeval anyway, since that allows you to get the primeval slayer buff. When dealing with adds, you can draw a line across groups of them and get some extremely fast wave clears for your team. In fact, I would say that that's one of the best ways to actually use this gun. Clearing through waves of mobs can put your team ahead on moats, and then you can get an invade off and deny the enemy team with 1 or 2 well-placed beams. This is all dependent on you actually getting heavy ammo to drop early in the game, since by the time that the brick spawns, you usually won't have enough to use this as an add clear weapon plus invasion weapon. In short, this is definitely a weapon that you should use in Gambit. Its only real drawback is its ammo reserves, which can be increased by a slight bit with armor perks. While it has the potential to be used in some pretty impactful plays, I don't think it can dethrone Sleeper as the heavy weapon of choice in Gambit, even with Sleeper's upcoming nerfs. Now, Pure PvE is where this weapon starts to get really fun. For strikes, it just destroys everything in your path. Most of this footage is from a day when it happened to be solar and heavyweight modifiers, so that's why stuff basically evaporates. On less favorable days, it will still take care of almost every single mob in one beam. The only thing that will take more are bosses or extremely tanky mobs like wanted enemies. Again, the only real complaint I can find for this gun in PvE is its lower ammo reserves. It is definitely worth it to get an armor piece that increases fusion rifle reserves just so you can hold one more shot. This is a small note, Fusion Rifle Scavenger only works on special weapons, not this one as it is a heavy. Also, it can be frustrating to sometimes only pick up one ammo from a brick and sometimes two. The lack of consistency there can really impact how useful the weapon ends up being in your loadout. The only thing that you can count on with this gun is explosions. The biggest reason I can give to you to use this weapon though isn't based on statistics like DPS or utility in certain encounters. The best reason to use this weapon is because it's fun. It's extremely fun to try and draw shapes into an enemy and watch them stagger to the explosion, seeing how big of a circle I can draw around a group of enemies and still destroy them all. It's truly awesome. On a more serious note, how does it actually perform compared to some of the other top DPS options? Because you all want to know that. Well, I don't think it's something that you should put your Whisper or the Worm away for if you're wanting to be optimal. Sleeper Simulant, Whisper the Worm, these weapons are capable of precision damage, which usually ends up putting them at a higher end of the damage spectrum. 1000 Voices definitely is capable of putting out high numbers though. In the first two fights of the raid, I actually think it's an extremely viable option for boss and add damage. Its one blight, as I've mentioned, is ammo. Fortunately, these fights present a plethora of mobs to give you more ammo between damage phases, or you can just use it to destroy some of the beefier adds in these fights. Is it optimal? Not really, but keep in mind if you've beaten the raid and gotten this weapon, you probably don't have to be optimal for every encounter, so you can afford some of your optimal play for an increase in explosions. I also wouldn't use this gun on Riven since you will probably end up exploding all of her eyes at once if you're doing the fight legit. The explosions are heavily dependent on positioning and you are more than likely going to cause a wipe if you don't do it properly. I do want to take a moment to talk about exotics in general. We always seem to chase the next big thing in terms of damage. What will be the next sleeper? And then what will be the next whisper? Well, I definitely understand why we search these weapons. The ever-present quest for what's best is basically why we hunt for loot in this game. But I think that we focus on that a little bit too often. Exotics are supposed to be deviations from the normal, a time to take a break from the rules, so to speak. Sometimes that involves going above and beyond the call of DPS. Sometimes it means doing something abnormal, like making the love child of Sleeper Simulant and Gallarhorn. This might not be the best weapon in terms of damage, but it is being ranked against absolute titans. So don't worry about optimal. Focus on the little things, like all the bodies that will get sent flying when you draw a line through swaths of mobs. Precision with this weapon involves proper line scribbling, not pinpoint accuracy. I hope you found this weapon review helpful. If you did, a positive rating would be appreciated. Thank you all for watching. It's good to be back.